Good evening. I'm Brandy Burnwald, the Director of Alumni Relations at Ferris State University, and I'm excited for our February social hour, Love and Art, a Valentine celebration. Tonight's social hour is a little different from past events. This evening, there are no supplies that need to be gathered or work surfaces that need to be prepped. It's almost Valentine's Day and love is in the air. So tonight, we ask you just to sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. Perhaps you're watching with a friend or a loved one. Grab a beverage and some snacks and snuggle in for about the next 40 minutes. At the end of the presentation, there'll be time for some questions. At any time, you can click the Ask a Question button near the bottom of your screen, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, simply put your question in the comments section. Now, a little bit about our special guest this evening. Dr. Rachel Foulk is a professor of art history at Ferris State University. She holds a PhD in art history from Emory, with a specialization in ancient Greek and Roman art. Professor Foulk teaches a wide range of art history courses at Ferris State and advises the art history minor. She aims to enhance the educational experience of Ferris students by helping them to appreciate art as an important form of human expression that communicates our values and ideals. And so with that, I welcome Dr. Rachel Foulk to begin her presentation tonight, Love and Art, a Valentine Celebration.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to start by thanking the Alumni Association for inviting me, and my thanks to Brandy and to Ben behind the scenes for making this virtual presentation work in the age of COVID. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can focus on the art. And I want to show a lot of works of art today, give you a sense of how love has been represented in many different time periods and in many different cultures. Certainly not all cultures and not all time periods. I think that would be far too large of a presentation and everybody would get bored. But the idea tonight is just to think about the different ways that we conceive of love, but also how we represent it as an experience that we all seem to have a stake in. But maybe we feel differently about love, or we represent love differently depending on who we are and certainly what our beliefs and values are. So as Brandy mentioned, I specialize in Greek and Roman art, and I want to start there in part because it's what I'm interested in, but also because I think Greek and Roman concepts of love are still very much with us today in modern times in the United States. And I'll kind of demonstrate how and why perhaps you're still seeing some Greek and Roman concepts if you're putting some Valentines together for friends or for loved ones. So I'm beginning with the goddess of love herself, Aphrodite, as she was conceived by the ancient Greeks. She's one of the oldest gods, or I should say goddesses, and there's a lot about her in Greek mythology, and there's certainly a lot of representations of her in art as well. You're looking at one from the 4th century BCE or BC by Praxiteles. It's actually a Roman copy. We no longer have the Greek original, but we have a series of copies and we have writings about the original by Praxiteles. And what makes this one special in terms of the history of art and in terms of representation is that she is in the nude. And in some ways, perhaps that makes sense to us that the goddess of love and fertility and sexuality would be represented in the nude, but that actually hadn't always been the case in Greek art. And I was getting a little bit ahead of myself with the slides, but you can see here, in Greek art, generally women, and that word kore simply means maiden, young woman. Young women had been represented really modestly before Praxiteles made his Aphrodite statue. Covered up, certainly we can tell they have bodies under those clothes, but a very modest representation. While at the same time, men were being represented in the nude. And I'll go back here and show you some deities that I think we have to keep sort of in our minds as we talk about Aphrodite, because Aphrodite has also been, come to be associated with a certain kind of love, with erotic love or romantic love in particular. And I'm showing you a couple of different Greek representations, shown as a young man on the left and as a sleeping baby on the upper right. And you can see nudity is already quite common for the representation of men, or in this case, male deities like Eros. And then you can see here on the bottom right, we don't always just see one Cupid. Cupid is the sort of Roman equivalent of Eros in the Greek world. We can also see multiple Cupids, or for that matter, multiple erotes. So this is a concept that seems to multiply depending on the artist's vision and on what an artist is trying to express. And as we will see, when Praxiteles takes the clothes off of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, that really, really makes an impact on the history of art and how women in particular come to be represented in art. Now, Praxiteles, he was commissioned to make a statue of Aphrodite by the people of Kos, that's spelled K-O-S, little city-state in ancient Greece. And he actually decided to make two. He made two statues, and I'm going to read an ancient source. Pliny the Elder says, one statue was clothed, and for this reason was preferred by the people of Kos, who had an option to buy. Although Praxiteles offered it as the same price as the other, this way he thought the only decent and proper response. Well, the people of Kos, they go with the traditional Aphrodite, and just kind of showing you how Aphrodite had been represented leading up to Praxiteles' work. And I know this is not perfectly preserved, but it shows us sort of typical 5th century representations of goddesses. They're a bit more relaxed here. We can see their bodies beneath the clothing. This is probably Aphrodite, the goddess of love and sexuality, showing us just a little bit more skin there, but she hadn't been represented in the nude. And the people of Kos went with the more traditional example. So that meant that the people of Knidos, and you can see that this that's now part of the title of this work, they bought the Venus, or the Aphrodite, that the Coans, the people from Kos, refused. And its reputation became greatly enhanced. This is the one that really sets off the revolution in the history of art and in the history of how love is personified. And, we do have to think about her as a goddess, but also a personification of these various qualities of love. Now, why is she nude in this particular representation? Well, part of it is that's what Praxiteles wanted to do. He pushed the envelope a little bit. But he gives us a narrative as well. If you look at some of the details, I'm hoping you can see my cursor, my mouse here. This is a water jug, a hydria, that would have been used to fill a tub with water. Probably not by Aphrodite herself. One of her assistants would do that. And this suggests to us that she had been taking a bath. And it is perhaps here that she's emerging from a bath, grabbing a garment and about to cover up, about to dry off, about to cover up. So her nudity is perhaps ever so slightly more acceptable because she is, in the act of bathing and emerging from that bath. But as I mentioned, this is the statue that becomes famous. And in fact, the owners of this statue set it up in a public temple and it's a round temple with columns, and it's open. People were able to appreciate the statue from all angles, from all sides, while they honored the goddess herself. This is a religious place, a sacred space, but it also, holds all of those ideas of love and beauty and fertility and sexuality. And certainly the people of ancient Greece from various city-states. They came to see this statue, and they appreciated it for its lifelike quality and for its beauty. And something I need to mention is, of course, statues in the ancient world were painted. That paint has long since worn off, but we do have to imagine these in color, not just the stark white stone that you see today. So, as I mentioned, this statue ends up setting off a revolution in the history of art, because once one artist does it, more artists, I don't want to quite say copy, but they are inspired to do something similar. They now see that it's acceptable, maybe even preferable, to show the goddess of love and other women, certainly other divinities, in the nude as well. Now, not all divinities. Some goddesses in the Greek world and in the Roman world are virgin goddesses. They're not associated with sexuality, and they're always going to be clothed in their representations. But Aphrodite or Venus, the almost equivalent of Aphrodite in the Roman world, she certainly is shown in the nude. And this sets off a whole series of emulations and copies of this Aphrodite type. And you'll notice in the example I'm showing you on the right, the Roman example that's sometimes known as the Medici Venus, because later in the Italian Renaissance, this was actually in the collection of the Medici family, very powerful family in Florence. You can see in the copy or in the emulation, it's not a direct copy because you can see her head is turned and the hands are slightly different. But there's a lot of similarities in how the goddess of love is depicted overall. She's got wide hips, which are emphasized in the way that she shifts her weight into contrapposto, and that makes, one hip sort of stick out a bit. You can see that over here. You'll notice also that both goddesses cover themselves, as if being somewhat modest, as if they know perhaps we're looking at them as viewers. But I think at the same time, and I think a lot of scholars agree with me, she's also drawing attention to herself and to her body. In putting her hand in front of something, is she being modest, or is she at the same time also drawing attention to that area of the body? I think it is purposely not clear. And depending on how you want to interpret it, you can see it in different ways. That's what's so cool about art a lot of the time, is that we bring something to it, and that we're able to interpret depending on, how we see an image. And certainly that multivalency, that many possibilities for interpretation, was part of the ancient world as well. Now, you may be asking, what is that on the side of the Medici Venus, on the side of this Roman statue of the goddess of love? Well, I wanted to get the best detail I could, and I apologize, it's ever so slightly fuzzier than I would like it to be, but I think you can start to see what we're looking at. And certainly it would have been enhanced by the paint that would have been part of this original. What you're looking at here is a dolphin, and it's a very stylized dolphin. The Romans often show dolphins as being a little bit mean looking with those teeth in the bottlenose. But we've got the eye and the teeth and the fins up here to the tail. And then if you're looking closely, you can see the cupids, right? These personifications, these gods of love, and in particular, desirous love, the feelings of desire, feelings of romantic love. And in this case, I'm going to call them cupids, but if we were using their Greek name, we would also call them erotes, the plural of eros, that god of desire. And we still get our words erotic, for instance, from the representation of eros and from the concept of eros. Now, what are they doing next to Aphrodite or next to Venus? certainly they are conjuring the type of love that she's often associated with: romantic love, sexual love, desirous love. And the dolphin refers to her birth, her miraculous birth from the sea. So we're actually getting a lot of elements of storytelling, as much as we are getting symbolism, that she is associated with the idea of love. But we're seeing here being born instead of taking a bath. So she is emerging from the ocean, and according to the various Greek myths that tell her story, she emerges from the ocean fully formed, a mature woman, and she, enters our existence, our plane, as this powerful force associated with love and all of the things associated with it, like fertility and beauty and sexuality that we see here. And if you are a fan of art and a fan of Renaissance art, you probably know where I'm going next, to the work of Sandro Botticelli and the Birth of Venus from centuries later, right? 1485, painted in Florence, Italy. And this was actually a commission of the Medici family, that very wealthy banking family who also happened to be great patrons of the arts in the 1400s in Florence. And they commissioned this most likely for a family wedding, for a gift. And it is a massive painting, as bigger than my background, bigger than any of the walls in my house, probably. It almost looks like a mural, but it is actually painted on panel. It's tempera paint on panel. And here we're seeing the same goddess of love, but she's now in a landscape. And so we see her emerging from these beautiful blue waters of the ocean, wafting on a wave, on a shell here. She's actually being blown to shore by these personifications of wind and particular winds. And then here comes one of the seasons, another deity that embodies the seasons, and she's flying over with a cloth to cover her up. But of course, Botticelli doesn't show her covered yet, because he's interested in the nude form and the tradition of art of showing Venus in the nude. So we see her as she emerges from the water, and she's almost to shore. Now, you'll remember I told you that ancient statue is known as the Medici Venus. And it's the Medici family that actually commissioned this painting of Botticelli. Botticelli was good friends with the Medici family, and he had access to this very statue. And I think you can see here how it has served as at least one point of inspiration for his painting. And again, that's not to say it's a copy. I'm very wary, and I don't say that artists necessarily just copy each other. Artists are inspired by each other. They are influenced by each other. And Botticelli was not just influenced by works of visual art. He's reading the poetry of the ancient Greeks and how they described the birth of Venus, which is a lovely description for instance, in the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite. She is described as having a golden countenance, and you can almost see that in the light and in her face. And of course, the hands are in similar positions. We see the lean of the body, the contrapposto in the stance. It makes her look very relaxed. But he changes things. He gives her that very long hair that certainly makes, for quite a scene. It really emphasizes the wind there. But we can see, I think, very specifically how he's borrowing from the ancient world, both visually and in their poetry. And of course, modern poets during the time of Botticelli, they're also writing new poems and making their own works of art, and he's certainly inspired by those as well. So the goddess of love, the concept of love, deemed appropriate as a wedding gift for a celebration of love here in 1485. And remember, the Medici in Florence, they're hiring only the best. And this really represents some of the best work that Florence had to offer in the early Renaissance. And I do encourage you, when we can travel again, if you can make it to Florence, go see this in the Uffizi galleries. This statue happens to be there too, so you can travel to ancient Rome and to Renaissance Florence. And certainly if you can't make it there, Google these images and get closer, zoom in, and you will see, for instance, there's actual gold. There's gold leaf in the leaves of those trees. Everything is made as rich and as beautiful and as pleasing as possible with the materials as well as with the composition. Now, I shouldn't skip over the Middle Ages. I've sort of jumped from ancient world to Renaissance, and in a discussion of Valentines, we do have to consider something that's actually quite important in our Valentine's traditions today, and that's the presentation of our heart. How many of you have gotten a Valentine's card that's in the shape of a heart, or maybe some candy in the shape of a heart? Well, that presentation of the heart, the offering of the heart, finds its origins in the Middle Ages. And I'm showing you a couple of different examples here. This one from a manuscript from the Romance of Alexander that sort of retells the story and the life of Alexander the Great. And over here, a more general tapestry that is an image of courtly love. And in both examples, you can see one potential lover offering to another a sort of abstracted version of the human heart with the double lobe. And this is the visual precursor of that heart that now is all over Valentine's cards and candy and what have you. And it is sort of an abstraction of the anatomy of the human heart. And it here is given as a visual offering and a sort of profession of love from one lover to the other. And I think it's kind of interesting. We can see both men and women offering their hearts in these examples. And of course, we've got to bring Cupid back into the picture as well. We see how Botticelli revives Venus. Well, he revives the Cupid as well. And he does that, I think, beautifully in this painting, Primavera, which is Italian for springtime. And we see, this is actually Venus again, Venus directing the celebrations of spring. And that includes dance. We have the three graces enjoying the outdoors in this very sheer and diaphanous clothing. We see the wind, the warm wind, Zephyrus. He grabs hold of Chloris, who is the goddess of things green. And as that warm wind hits things green, the flowers burst forth, and she is transformed into the goddess Flora. And you can see all of the flowers on the floor of the meadow as well. But of course, there's Cupid. Here, I think very, very closely associated with Venus, probably to be understood as her son. And he's shooting his arrows of love. And these are not arrows that wound or that kill. They make people fall in love, which can be joyous, and it can also be tragic, because sometimes those love stories don't work out. But you'll notice that Cupid is blindfolded. Love is blind. And he's doing his work sort of haphazardly, and who knows who he's going to hit next. So Venus and Cupid, we see Venus, we see Cupid, and we see the heart, all of this coming together. And it's really still part of our iconography of Valentine's Day and our larger iconography of love as we visualize it and as we celebrate it today. I want to show you a little bit later version of Venus and Cupid, because they sort of represent the concept and the idea of love. But I love this example by the French painter Francois Boucher from the 1700s, because it's just so sweet. It's so just enjoyable. It looks like Venus and to a certain extent, Cupid is having a good time. So here's Venus. She's disrobed again, probably about to get in the water and take her bath. Notice that she wears pearls, pearl earrings associating her with her birthplace, the sea. We also see the dove, which is part of her iconography. And sometimes we will see doves on our Valentines still today. And then she's actually disarming Cupid. It's almost like Cupid has shot too many arrows and Cupid needs to take a break. So as Mama takes her bath, she seems to be taking away the arrows of Cupid, saying, calm down with making all those people fall in love. And I love how Boucher shows us Cupid because he doesn't look super happy to have his toy being taken away, right? You can sort of see the grimace on his face. And then look at these other Cupids pointing like, uh-oh, you're getting in trouble, dude, right? And they're sort of pointing and talking and, you know, seeing that Cupid needs to take a break. He needs to take a rest. So this is the type of imagery that I think we still see on a lot of our Valentine cards today as we conceptualize and personify the ideas of love. Of course, we also see in art perhaps a more physical representation of lovers enjoying a kiss, enjoying lovemaking. And we see that here, I think, in the very famous statue by Auguste Rodin, the French sculptor, his famous Kiss from 1882. And it's carved in marble. You can see that here in a couple of different views. And of course, it looks different in different lighting. This is the same statue, but depending on the lighting, we see the colors differently and we appreciate the texture differently. Now, Rodin was not painting his marble sculptures. He was instead appreciating the texture of the stone. And you can see here, this is a photo of the statue group as we see it today in the Rodin Museum in Paris. You can see it sits in the center of this beautiful room with the parquet floor. I think it's great up here that we actually have an Aphrodite and a Cupid. So, you know, another way of personifying the idea of love. And here, the two lovers reaching in for their first kiss. And I say their first kiss because we actually know a little bit of the history of how this statue was conceived. It was originally going to be part of this monumental set of doors known as the Gates of Hell that Rodin was commissioned to make for a new museum of the decorative arts in Paris. That museum is never fully realized, although the Musée d'Orsay, if you're familiar with that, that is actually in the place where this Museum of Decorative Arts was supposed to be. And Rodin was commissioned to make these massive bronze doors for the museum. And you can see in the title, this is not a happy picture. This is the Gates of Hell, which is in fact inspired by hellish literature, including Dante's Inferno, and Baudelaire's Flowers of Evil. And we have the figure of Dante up here, who you may know separately as the thinker. Separately, it is a more contemplative statue, but here it's Dante looking down at the suffering of people in hell. And Rodin had originally conceived the figures of Paulo and Francesca, who show up in Dante's Inferno. He was going to include this relief sculpture as part of the doors. But he actually decided that the way he sculpted the two figures here was a bit too positive for his doors, which are about suffering. And I should say a little bit more about Paulo and Francesca. They are punished in Dante's Inferno because they are adulterers. And in the story of the Inferno, they're actually caught by Francesca's husband just as they take their first kiss, and they're killed, and then they suffer in hell. Well, that's really rough subject matter. It's probably not what you intended or expected to look at tonight. And actually, that is what Rodin decided as well, at least in part. He decided that these lovers and this lover's embrace, as he conceived them here, was too beautiful, was too pure to be on the doors. And so he recreates Paulo and Francesca in a much more suffering scene and puts them on the doors, and eventually separates the lovers and changes the name, and it becomes simply known as the kiss. And I think one can appreciate it and interpret it in an entirely different way as it becomes its own sculpture that you can walk up to and relate to and experience in a very different way. And so we see that there in the Rodin Museum today. And you may have seen a copy of it in your experience in other places. Rodin's images were officially copied, both his marble sculptures and his bronzes. There's several exact copies, and there I'll use the word copy, that show up in various museum collections throughout the world, including in the United States. So speaking of the kiss, let's look at another famous example. I think this was actually used for the advertising for this event as well. And I know it is a perennial favorite of many of my students and many of my friends. This is Gustav Klimps' The Kiss, a very large painting, perfectly square, from 1907 to 1908. And again, we see an embrace, a kiss, but it's a different kiss than we were seeing as conceived by Rodin. Here, the man really wraps himself around the woman, and we don't really see the man's face. We can't relate to the man in quite the same way that we could in Rodin's sculpture. And he wraps his hands around the woman. Of course, she puts her hand on his, and we see more of his face, and we see his cheek as he kisses the woman. But of course, it's not just about their faces or their hands. It's about the whole environment that he creates here, and their bodies and their clothing. And this is a painting that actually incorporates gold leaf. It incorporates, I'm a little bit out of order. It incorporates gold leaf. It incorporates metal together with paint, with pigments. And it really makes the painting shine. And he actually does this in several paintings. And we sometimes call them his gold paintings. You may know The Woman in Gold, the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer that does something quite similar. And as we look at this painting, we see all of the pattern work too. It's not just the gold, but it's how the gold works with the other colors and textures, the rectangles, the swirls, the circles. It's really the patterns of the clothing that help us recognize the woman's body, the man's tunic, and perhaps a robe that sort of wraps around both of them. And then we've got this lovely gold textured background, and then almost like a meadow floor there with all those beautiful flowers. And we know that Klimt actually made a trip to Italy shortly before painting in his gold style and before making this painting. And he visited, in particular, he visited Venice and Ravenna. And he was enraptured by the Byzantine mosaics that he saw there. And so I'm showing you an example of something that served as certainly a point of inspiration for Klimt as he worked on the Kiss. And so here we are in the church of San Vitale in Ravenna that was at one time completely covered in mosaic. You can see some of the mosaics have been lost, but beautiful mosaics over the apse, over the ceiling, the side walls, around the altar. And I'm going to show you some details. On the side of the altar over here, we see this image of the Empress Theodora and her attendants. And she and her husband were the patrons. They paid for these mosaics. And they're actually shown presenting the bread and the wine. She's got the big goblet of wine for the celebration of the Eucharist. And she brings that to the altar, sort of participating in the religious ritual. And as you look at her and you look at her attendants, I want you to appreciate the clothing and the pattern and how we see a gold background and green on the ground. And we'll see how, Klimt brings some of this into his work. And I'm going to get you a little bit closer so you can appreciate the Tesserai. Those are the individual pieces that make up a mosaic made of colored stone. And a lot, in this case, a lot of glass that has been backed with gold leaf. And that's what makes that gold background shine behind our figures. It actually has gold and glass. And if we then turn to the work of Klimt, you can see how he's been inspired by those patterns and those textures. And he's not making a mosaic. This is certainly a painting, but, and he's incorporated with his oil painting that use of gold leaf to paint the very thin gold into his picture. But he also gives us some outlines and some little squares and some swirls and some circles. And I can't help but see the inspiration. This is just from a little bit higher up in the apse of that church. I can't help but see how he was inspired by his trip to Ravenna and his study of those Byzantine mosaics. And I want to posit, I want to put forward that it's not just the pattern, it's not just the colors or the metal that he's inspired by, it's also the experience. In Byzantine mosaic, that gold background is really thought to conjure a heavenly environment, to take us to the world beyond, that we're in a heavenly divine plane. And I think Klimt is doing something similar. And this is not only my suggestion, this is many scholars that have studied carefully the work of Klimt. And he's sort of secularizing, if you will, that divine experience. So, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, I guess, to say secularizing the divine. Maybe I should put it a different way. Love has become a divine experience for these lovers, for the pair that is in the kiss. They are not just in this world anymore. They are on a different plane, a more timeless plane, a more heavenly plane of existence. And Klimt wants us to be able to visualize and imagine their passion and their feeling. And he does that not only in having them sort of be subsumed into each other, but also with that gold background and the gold clothing and the beautiful flowers there. It's creating a different existence, a different place for us to view. And love becomes a religious experience in Klimt's version of the kiss. And a lot of people wonder, well, who is it in the kiss? And we don't really know for sure. It has been suggested that it's Klimt and one of his lovers or his partner. But it also may have some sort of mythological background to it. There are examples of lovers in mythology who embrace and kiss. And I don't think it's supposed to be specific. As much as we want to search for who is this, I think perhaps it is more relatable because it's not a specific person, because it's otherworldly, because it becomes divine and almost heavenly. This brings me to a little bit later, to a different experience, but I think something that actually relates thematically. As we think about lovers and we think about color and pattern and even that gold color, I want to take a look at Jacob Lawrence's The Lovers from 1946. Jacob Lawrence was an American painter, an African-American painter, a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. And we see here a very intimate scene of the lovers from 1946 that takes us into a home. And we see these lovers embrace, and we see their record player, their drinks, their cigarette. We're very much in a private environment, their family photos, their house plants. But we can see also their love and their intimacy. And, it's a different approach. Certainly, it's a more modern approach than we've seen so far. I'm a little bit later in history here. But I can also see the influence and the inspiration of the swirls of a painter like Klimt and the gold background as it is imagined in Jacob Lawrence's work and in this home of the two lovers. And, it's participating in this larger tradition of art making. Now, Lawrence actually referred to his work as dynamic cubism. He was certainly inspired by those avant-garde modern artists, Picasso and Braque, in their interest in pattern and color and shape and abstraction. But he adds that word dynamic, and I really do see that here to give us a sense of movement. And that movement, we see it in the swirls of the couch. We see it in the embrace of the couple. We see it in the flowing patterns of the room. And there is certainly a dynamic quality to what he shows us here in this very private scene. But at the same time, a scene that I think many of us can relate to in terms of the embrace and the love that we see here. And speaking of love, right? This is probably a work that is familiar to many of you. It is an iconic, at this point, work from the pop art era by the artist Robert Indiana. And it is the word love, L-O-V-E, written in the Didone typeface, which is a serif typeface that had been well known for a long time, oftentimes associated with printed things, with ads, with popular culture that would be consumed in signs and print media. But Robert Indiana turns that into a word, but also into an image, L-O-V-E. And very importantly, he slants the O. He slants the O and turns that to the side. That's part of his design here that divides the word love into quadrants. And it's probably something you've seen before in sculpture form. Maybe you've seen the postage stamp. Originally, it was a Christmas card design for the Museum of Modern Art that was produced in 1965. And that may explain the red and the green that is so prominent in that first print that we see. But you also see blue is often incorporated into the image as well. And it's one of those images that is really open to interpretation and what we want to bring to it, what we consider love. You know, as a Christmas card, is it about God's love and the celebration of Christmas and divine love? Certainly, that's how some people would have seen it. Is it about romantic love? You know, sometimes people still get this as part of their wedding invitation or part of the stamp for their wedding invitation. But it could also be about friendly love. It's whatever you bring to the idea and the concept of love. And I think that's what really, in some ways, what makes this work so interesting and resonant to people. To quote one of the scholars at MoMA, Deborah Y., she says, quote, "It's full of erotic, religious, autobiographical, and political underpinnings." And when she says autobiographical, she means for the artist, for Robert Indiana. He was advised and directly advised by his partner, his lover at the time, Ellsworth Kelly. And Kelly was another modern artist who really liked the hard edge, the hard line between colors. And that was part of Ellsworth Kelly's work. And Robert Indiana incorporates it into his. And I think that is in part what makes this autobiographical. But it's also, you know, what Indiana makes of his own concept of love, and, you know, as a gay man, how he was able to express love both visually and throughout his life. You know, what was acceptable in society. And, you know, that's part of the picture as well. I think that's perhaps what makes it political, at least for Robert Indiana. But, you know, many people look at this and they don't bring all of that to the work necessarily. They bring what they experience with the concept of love to this work. And that may be what makes it so resonant, is that all of us can bring our definition to this work. And Deborah Y. says that's what makes it both accessible and complex. This is what Robert Indiana has been quoted saying about it. And he's really focused on, here anyway, in this quotation, he's focusing on the formal elements of it, and the conceptual elements of it. The idea that I'm looking at the last line there, the concept that the word is also fit and viable subject for art. Which is in some ways a very modern idea, although we see it in perhaps the medieval world and the ancient world too, where inscriptions and beautifully written texts become images for interpretation too. Now, I know that there are other concepts of love, though. We've talked a lot about romantic love, but what about family love? That's certainly part of our experiences, and it may be part of your Valentine's celebration as well. So I'm showing you here a very famous family, the Holy Family, as imagined by Michelangelo, Mary and the baby Jesus and Joseph. And I just love this example because they do look like a family, you know, passing that child from one parent to the next, the little baby Jesus playing with the hair of Mary there. You know, there's something quite touching and quite real about this family, you know, in this representation of the Holy Family. We perhaps can also see experiences of our individual families. And women artists in particular really excel with the representations of mothers and children. Perhaps this makes sense. This is a woman's experience. And that's not to say that men can't represent this. Certainly they can. We just saw it beautifully represented by Michelangelo here. But this becomes an important subject for women artists like the American artist Mary Cassatt. Look at the intimacy and the care as the mother. I think it's a mother, although some people say perhaps it's a nurse. But nonetheless, and there's debate about that. If it's mother or nurse, there's still love there. There's still care and intimacy and softness in how Mary Cassatt shows us the bath. And then the very abstract work by Barbara Hepworth. And I think that abstraction is just wonderful there. It makes it timeless. This reminds me of, the prehistoric sculptures that we have, and reminds me that love and that experience of parenting is a very important and fundamental experience of love among human beings, between a mother and child and parent and child. And we see that too in the work of Carrie Mae Weems. She did a whole series of photographs called the Kitchen Table series, where she imagines these intimate moments. And I will say they are staged. They are staged in what was her home. That's Carrie Mae Weems, the artist, who you see in these photographs and in the whole series. And it's not always her family, but she stages these people as if they are her family. And it's these touching, intimate scenes between parents, between spouses, reading at the table, putting on makeup, that are just, ways that we experience and ways that we express love. And, it doesn't have to have the gold and the shimmer to still be powerful and meaningful. And while it doesn't have gold leaf, it certainly does have that light, I think, that makes this series so incredibly powerful. And Carrie Mae Weems is still with us. She's a very active artist today. And if you can look her up on YouTube and hear her speak about her work, I highly, highly recommend it. And I've talked about romantic love, and I've talked about family love. What about the love of friendship? I thought we should take a look at that too. And we see that here in the work of Tamara De Lepica, her two friends. And they're such fabulous friends, right? All decked out in their jewelry and in their red. And you can just see that they're enjoying speaking to each other, maybe gossiping a little. And they share an intimacy of friendship that I think is a love worthy of celebrating on Valentine's Day too. And I want to mention that I sometimes teach pop culture, and I've got to get pop culture into today's lecture, because pop culture is art too. And this is part of, I think, our expanding ways that we represent love. And so I'm showing you a couple of scenes from Parks and Recreation, a show which I know many of you are fans of. I've got some of my galentines, some of my girlfriends are watching tonight. And I think, for as funny as this holiday is, and, it relies on a comedic actress in Amy Poehler and comedic writing, isn't this a celebration of female friendship? Valentine's Day is so often about romantic love, but Galentine's Day, as it was proposed by Leslie Knope, the main character of Parks and Rec, she says friendship is worthy of celebrating, and she makes a holiday for it. She says February 13th, my lady friends and I leave our husbands and boyfriends at home, and we just come home, or we just come and kick it breakfast style. And you can see they're enjoying their lovely breakfast, but really enjoying each other's company and celebrating friendship here. And we saw that here. We see it here. It's something that we still celebrate today. And so as we conclude, or as I conclude my lecture today and open things up to questions, I'm going to slide back to Robert Indiana's image of love, because this is an image that's all about our own interpretation and what we bring to the concept of love, to the representation of love, and how we want to celebrate it. And as we celebrate it in our own ways and celebrate it with our own images and our own favorite works of art, we're going to make it our own this Valentine's Day, I think, or I'm going to make it my own anyway, and share the love with all of my friends and family. And I hope that you will do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. It was wonderful. The history is amazing. You are so well versed. I think you took through it all. I think you answered all the questions that some may have had as you went along.
Okay.
I know I'm going to look into Gallons Day and perhaps make that a tradition now. I think that's a great idea. So
yeah, so it's been around for 11 years, and apparently it is a very popular holiday. There are products that are sold for it, just like there are products for Valentine's Day. And you know, it just opens up that concept that we can share the love with everybody.
I love it. It's perfect. I mean, you took us through all phases. You touched on all kinds of love. And I think as we celebrate this season and we kick off Valentine's weekend, you took us there. So thank you so much for sharing your evening and all your knowledge with us tonight.
Thank you.
As a reminder, if you missed any part of the presentation or would like to go back and review a section, this webinar can be found beginning tomorrow on this website under past events or our Facebook page at Ferris Alumni. If you would like to join us next month for our Alumni Social Hour, then check out our registration page for the details on a virtual wine tasting. That presentation will be Thursday, March 11th at 7 p.m. And it's brought to you by Meredith Lazan. Meredith graduated in 2010 with an associate's in hotel and restaurant management with a minor in special events and meeting planning. Currently, she serves as the operations manager at Left Foot Charlie in Traverse City, Michigan. So for more information on the virtual wine tasting presentation, go ahead and check us out on our website at ferris.edu/alumni. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great evening and a happy Valentine's Day.